Welcome back to our double feature looking at the VAMP and now the HISS tank for Assembly Required Mass Online Rally 2. I am Christopher McLeod, aka Diagnostik80, and I am joined once again by the two brain boxes behind articulated points, Patrick, Notpicard, Stewart, and Philip, look at my Septic Tank Donnelly. We continue our look at the HISStories behind two vehicles today, and now it's the turn of Cobra's high-speed Sentry, the HISS tank. Before we start talking about the vehicle itself, let's have a quick HISStory lesson, about the inspiration behind the toy's design.
The jokes don't get any better than this, folks.
They don't at all. This is the pinnacle, I'm afraid. The original HISS tank concept came from a dream, courtesy of Hasbro designer Wayne Luther, not Serpentor. It would effectively be a snake's head whose mouth would open to reveal the drivers and some teeth. The early concept saw a much bulkier and more complicated vehicle imagined by Wayne, including a rocket booster at the rear and a feature that would see the vehicle deploy attack pods that would transform into small guns. However, a lot of these aspects would have to be dropped in order for it to work as a toy. Initially, he wanted working treads, but when that was refused, more ideas were attempted that could have seen the famous HISS tank utilising big, bulky off-road tyres, and in one design, 3 wheels and a large axle that would work in a similar way to the Swamp Mashers setup. In the end, they decided to go with fake treads with rollers underneath the base, and in the second volume of Dan Klingensmith's book series, Creating G.I. Joe, project engineer Joe Marone explained that his greatest achievement was making the snaps that would connect the treads to the bodywork successfully when a child put the toy together. The final iconic design was released in 1983 in the second year of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero toy line, with a very unique driver, which we will discuss in the next segment. Right then, crew, before we get into the HISS driver, let's discuss this early concept first. How cool did that look?
Amazingly cool. I mentioned in the VAMP panel that there was a vehicle that I desperately wanted and got swapped with a VAMP, and the one that I really wanted was the HISS tank.
Amazing!
Which I did end up getting for Christmas. So for my birthday, I ended up with a VAMP. A month later, I got the HISS tank.
It was a blessing in disguise, wasn't it?
It was, yes. So I ended up with one of my own for the VAMP as a result of that mix-up. But yeah, incredibly, also incredibly generous giving me a VAMP for my birthday. I really enjoyed it. But the HISS tank is really, really the thing. One of the two things that I wanted the most that year from the G.I. Joe toy line. You look at the 83 toy line for vehicles, it's got to be the Sky Striker and the HISS tank.
Iconography, I would call that.
Yeah.
And Phil, but what about yourself, mate? I mean, let's talk about this original concept as well a little bit. It does look a little bit like another vehicle we'll see later on, but what did you think of that original kind of concept with the kind of mouth opening and all? Do you think, are you kind of happy they didn't go that kind of way with it and they kind of went with what we got?
I mean, no, I kind of do wish we'd have gotten with the concept art show, the big snapping jaw. That's, I don't know, it's very He-Man, but it's still would work really well for Cobra.
It is a He-Man vehicle, definitely. I suppose it would be a Snake Men vehicle, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Few years down the line, maybe.
King Hiss sitting in the back.
I like how the concept art shows us being piloted by a 1985 Snake Eyes. It is a very cool concept, and if they could have made that work and get that snake motif really in there, I think that, I mean, the HISS tank is iconic enough, but this is the best vehicle of all time, maybe.
I will say that I think in terms of the whole snakehead idea, I'm not saying that the HISS, the final version, loses that, but it definitely makes it way more subtle. And it's something that you don't necessarily see immediately, and you don't think the HISS tank looks cool, but you don't think that's a snake head necessarily. Some people might have done. I personally did not put that 2 and 2 together until you really start looking at the design and how people were designing this stuff and what their ideas were. That's when it dawned on me that, oh yeah, I suppose that elongated head. Obviously they could have put 2 fangs on the front, and then straight away you'd be like, oh yeah, I see that now. But it's definitely more subtle, isn't it? In that more iconic HISS one.
It's definitely more abstract. You kind of have to think more, just very basic shape-wise against an actual snake head. And, some snakes don't even work with that shape. So you have to be very specific about what you're thinking about.
That's true as well. You've got the snub nose kind of ones, haven't you? That certainly don't have that elongated head. And obviously, well, in the Cobra, which I suppose you can still have the pointy head, but, it's more about the old side flaps, as I call them. We've also got, again, thanks to Dan as well, Dan Klingensmith Jr. for the use of the actual digital versions of his book pages. Thank you, Dan. Cracking books as well. Officially licensed, Creating G.I. Joe. You can grab them off his website. We don't have links necessarily because we're on a live panel, for God's sake. But should be able to find that if you Google it. And anyway, Ron Rudat designed the Hiss driver. And what I really like here is so much has gone into this particular design to, I don't know, for one, to kind of like hit as many snake motifs as possible, but also like the necessity of what it would need, if you're driving this kind of all-terrain vehicle.
I don't think that anyone can design a G.I. Joe character quite like Ron Rudat can. Obviously, I mean, he designed so many of the classic characters, but his knowledge of military equipment, it really goes a long way. But it's also a bit of his ability to mix some of those things and put things not really where they belong, but make them look right and make a cohesive looking figure. But with the Hiss driver, it's interesting because it doesn't seem that he pulled as much from real world military pieces as he did the functionality of them, and thought through, what happens if the Hiss driver has to get out of the tank? What kind of boots does he need to have on? What kind of helmet does he need to wear if he's just going to be in that exposed glass canopy? Because he definitely has body armor and an armored helmet on inside there. So he put a lot of thought into this, I think, and there's a bit of Cobra intimidation going on too with that big Cobra logo. It's a beautiful figure. I love it.
The helmet's got like a snake motif on it as well, hasn't it? And like the and also like the fact that like the padded element on the legs that he added, just because he knew that it's going to be off-road, it's going to be uncomfortable, he's going to need that padding when he's driving. I love all these different like elements that are thrown in. Personally though, I do think it ends up looking absolutely insane, and it's turned out that this kind of drive is quite an iconic one.
He's certainly unique in the 1983 line. He kind of looks like no one else, and kind of really stands out for that. But I think he's also a little too scrawny. Somebody with that much ornamentation onto him, you'd think he'd have a bit more of an imposing figure.
Yeah, you're right. You'd think it'd be bulked out a little bit more, wouldn't you? I must admit, like I think I prefer the more modern versions of the Hiss driver, like where they've kind of modernized it, and specifically when we get to like a cheeky little Pursuit of Cobra version, I do like that Hiss driver very much.
I love how the driver serves as the big pop of a color whenever you put him inside the Hiss tank that is mostly an all black vehicle.
That's big time.
A red figure that stands out, which if they had gone with a very standard blue Cobra figure and put it in there, or even something gray like the Stinger driver that came later, it would look very monochromatic. But that bit of red really helps the vehicle. He complements it very well. And I have to think that the Hiss driver also inspired the Crimson Guard that later came later. Because in the comic book, whenever the Crimson Guards first showed up, maybe it was a mix-up, actually. But when they first showed up, I think that they just drew in some Hiss drivers at first. So
I think you're right.
That was a mistake. There definitely seems to be a bit of an invitation to red with this figure.
There's another cute couple of things on here. We also have multiple iterations, color studies that were done. So we've got like a reverse black and red, we've got maroon, we've got all black, blue, black and red, and blue. So I mean, like, what are your kind of favorites out of these, or do you think they did well to go with the right color here?
I mean, Patrick points out that the red really does pop in the black of the vehicle, but part of me is just kind of OCD in that way that I want all those early Cobra troopers to be in that Cobra blue.
So you'd have preferred a bluey, which thankfully we kind of get later on, don't we? But we'll come to that later. Pat, would you have liked to see a different color, or are you happy with that kind of red?
I'm actually really happy with the red. I think that it pops. Red was also a color that became synonymous with Cobra as a maybe tertiary color of things. And I think that as we see repaints of the HISS tank, what I really would have preferred is to have an accompanying HISS driver in some of those other colors. So to have eventually gotten the Cobra Blue. I do like to see Cobra Blue on almost everything. Just ideally in my mind, they would release that somewhere else and you would have both of them. Maybe as a Fang pilot, because on the file card for the HISS driver, I believe it also says that he's capable of piloting Fang.
Who isn't? I've seen Buzzer in one of them things, mate. anyone can fly that. One thing I will say, and there's something that I think is kind of sometimes missed. Obviously, it would have been an extra cost and all that jazz, but I do like it when the drivers kind of interact with the vehicle more than just sitting in the cockpit. And there's an element on the design, I think on the input drawings that I'll flash up as well, where Ron points out that there are electronics on his wrist. And I would have loved to have seen a little like a hose attachment that would go from his wrist to like a port behind him, like on like a computer panel behind him on like the HISS. Something like that I think would be really cute for drivers, because they're not all, I mean, most of the time they're not going to be out on display. I mean, I know some people will display all of their figures, totally cool. But for the most part, you want them in their vehicle, don't you? So I think you could probably get away with having one of those little ports on his wrist, one of those little tabs that you could pop a thing in, but then it would break off easily, wouldn't it? So there's like a pros and cons to it all. But would you like to see some more things like that with vehicle drivers?
If you can push the limits on technology, that's Cobra where you would do it, because they don't have to adhere to any sort of real-world military aesthetic. And so getting into the more cyberpunk elements that were especially big in the middle of the 80s, yeah, that would have been pretty fun to see.
I just love to see that thought of like, he's plugged in to his HISS tank. So some of the things that he does in the HISS are through his own physical reactions, or he's looking and the camera's moving, or he's looking and the gun's moving and that kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? Just I like that thought that Cobra would have that kind of stuff. Like
the Star Viper and the Cobra Stellar Stiletto, just making that a little more visible in the actual toy.
Yeah, exactly. But still really cool, still really iconic. Well, let's talk a bit more about the HISS tank getting a red repaint next. In 1985, Sears jumped at the opportunity to get an exclusive red high-speed Sentry with a matching mobile missile system, calling it the SMS, or Sentry Missile System, as a companion piece to the VAMP and HAL, exclusive the year prior. It wasn't the first red HISS, however, but we shall cover that later on. Other than a micro vehicle in 1991, this basic HISS model wouldn't be used again until the year 2000, and the blue HISS-3 for the Real American Hero collection. One interesting addition was that of the driver, a blue repaint of the original with Talking Battle Commander's Cobra Commander's waist piece thrown in for good measure, but now we had a code name, Rip It. It went back to red again in 2002 for the Crimson Strike Team concept, as well as an Operation Crimson Sabotage KB Toys exclusive in 2004 for Valor vs Venom, which also featured a red asp and 3 Crimson Guards with varying skin tones and hair colours. In 2008 we got our first real modern era HISS tank in the Target exclusive Attack on Cobra Island blue HISS, with a grey repainted Cobra Trooper as the driver. Oddly enough, the HISS driver was released on a single card for the 25th anniversary, and therefore a slightly different version called the HISS Tank Commander was added to the standard retail black release of the HISS also in 2008. The odd thing here was that he was blue. I know, right? Seems like the decos were all over the place to me, but hey ho, we got a third release of the HISS in the same year courtesy of the Ultimate Battle Pack. It was red and came with another HISS driver, only in red and silver. At least they matched the colours this time. 2009 gave us a very cool update and slight retool with the white Arctic HISS and a very cool Arctic HISS driver that incorporated parts from Snake Eyes version 35 and Snow Serpent version 8. The HISS featured the same missile assembly as the Stinger, released in the same year, and a cool removable storage rack and a removable bedroll on either side. This made for a very cool update to the previous releases and was probably my favourite version of this model so far. Running Press released a tiny HISS in 2014 based on the original model, with lights, sounds and an opening cockpit. In 2015 we received an SDCC exclusive Crimson Strike set featuring for the first time ever a G.I. Joe version of the iconic Bad Guys vehicle. It was called the Chimera. It was green, it had a different railgun weapon system, and came with two figures, Ralph Steeler Pulaski and Grunt. Just never felt right though, did it? We also got another Cobra Hiss in the same year for the 50th anniversary set, Silent Strike, in orange this time for literally no reason at all, along with an orange Hiss driver, and for the very first time a specific Hiss gunner, just in case you didn't have enough orange. In the year that will not be named, Jada Toys dropped a cute mini vehicle Hiss in a Nano Hollywood Rides 3-pack with a 132 scale version just around the corner, packed with Destro. We got a black Retro Series Hiss tank with a brand new driver build, decoed in red, just like the original colour combo, as well as a follow-up blue HISS-3 this year, with a blue repainted driver with the Rip-It codename designation. The circle of life is now complete. Well, it will be when they do another red version. So many Hiss tanks here, guys. Out of all of the ones that use that model, which one's your favourite, starting with you, Phil?
I mean, you can't go wrong with the iconic black, the first original. It sets the stage. It knows what it is. It's not trying to be more than what it is. And what it does is doing very well.
So you're the standard issue, you're the first one, you're the original. Pat, what would you have said? Would you have said the same, or are you would do other versions you like?
Getting the other versions was nice, but the original Hiss tank is so iconic that I think that it's probably the most iconic vehicle in the entire G.I. Joe toy line. It's definitely a testament to how popular it was and how recognizable it was and how still marketable it is, because it doesn't really, as far as toys, it doesn't really do a lot. It doesn't have a lot of moving parts. It just looks amazingly cool. And they can keep cranking them out, and I just keep buying them. It's a great vehicle. I think that the version 1 Hiss tank is definitely at least a contender for the best vehicle in the entire original G.I. Joe run.
Once again, I'm going to go against the grain here and say that my favourite version of the model is the Arctic Hiss, mainly because rather than just doing a straight normal repaint, they threw in loads of really interesting additions. And it's, I think, seeing it like in black, yeah, I agree with you guys, that's how it should be, perfect, do not fuck with it. But then we get a blue one, we get a red one, we get a blue one, we get a red one, and it's just like, I get for that, it's like you're just repainting it, and it's the original black. It's never going to be cooler than that. But then when the Arctic Kiss came along, the Kiss tank, different tank. The fact they had all those two little additions on the side, you got like that little kind of crate that can hold stuff, and then you've got the bedroll on the other side, and you just think, oh man, this is so dope. And on top of that, the driver was so much different. It's like we're getting like, you know, he's got winter gear on, and that for me straight away, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm in. I'm enjoying this. They've gone at extra level, and rather than just repaint it, they've created something very, very cool.
I think you're talking to two people here who just can't separate history from looking at these things. So for us, that impact, that legacy is always going to be a part of what we factor into when we're looking at it.
I will say that the Hiss tank was definitely one of those ones that was on my radar from an early age, because it is synonymous with the brand. Like, we had the Hyena, and we had the black version 2 Hyena, and we had sometimes they packed, and we'll get to that actually in a second, I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but we had that in the UK, so I definitely saw this multiple times, even before it became, you know, the Hiss tank, as it were. But yeah, I agree with you, it's one of the coolest, one of the most iconic. You will be saying that a lot, I think, in this panel. What were you stealing there, Pat? Or were you putting something back?
That was the Jada Toys Nano Hollywood Rides Hiss tank. You can't tell by it just being a tiny little
black dot. No, we can all see it. It's that iconic. It bleeds through the screen. Yes, I mean, there's a couple of other things we should probably mention around about here. There were different versions, weren't there, Phil, in both the cartoon and the comic early on?
Yeah, so that designed feature of the lowering cockpit jaw did kind of translate into the comic in the early issues, where some of the original Hiss tanks were, for some reason, 2-seaters side by side, and it did have the lowering bit. So that's part of the concept art kind of leaking through into the comic.
Yeah.
And then in, I want to say, first episode of Pyramid of Darkness on the Sunbow cartoon, we had Cobra Commander in what I like to call a command Hiss tank, where I think it had like 2 turrets. It was also a 2-seater side by side. it was situated
It's
in the center of
massive.
other HISS tanks, so it was actually a size difference too. And I wish we could have seen a whole range of HISS tanks. That'd have been real fun.
Yeah, I agree with you on the kind of command HISS tank. That's something that just has not really been addressed in the toy world yet, and I think that's, you never know. We could get a HasLab project for G.I. Joe, and it could be the double-seater HISS. Wouldn't surprise me, honestly. That would be really cool. But anyway, yeah, thanks for mentioning those. As the 80s were coming to a close, Hasbro looked at mixing things up a bit with the HISS tank's iconic design. In 1989, and despite having the now iconic HISS tank design on television, in the comics, and on numerous merchandise, Hasbro decided it needed an upgrade, and boy did it get one. The HISS-2 burst onto the scene with a similar vibe, but a drastically different deco. Gone was the brutal all-stark black paint scheme, and in was the greyish blue and bright red. Dave Kunitz designed the second iteration and took heavily from Wayne Luther's original presentation art, even down to the way the cockpit lowered to reveal the new Track Viper driver, like a snake's mouth was opening. Speaking of the new driver, the Track Viper certainly looked the part, but I have to say wasn't quite as well utilised as the HISS driver. Showing some similar vibes with a number of the other curved faceplate crew, he still suffered a bit from a rather inconsistent aesthetic, and different shades of grey parts made him look a bit unfinished. It was a true upgrade though in every way, but didn't quite reach the same heights from an iconic point of view. It was featured heavily in the Deke cartoon and in the comics, but certainly didn't command the same sort of attention that the original did. It was released a second time in the same year in a Benny's exclusive 2-pack with the Mud Fighter. Surprisingly, we would only see this version used one more time in 2003 for the con-exclusive Cobra Hiss 2B, in a very deep blue and somehow more garish red colour. Not a very memorable reuse, honestly. HISS 2, give me your thoughts on the HISS 2, Pat. Did you feel like it was a decent enough upgrade to the first one?
Absolutely. I really like the fact that they have the lowering jaw like cockpit. It could have functioned a little bit more easily for me. It just kind of flops down, and sometimes is, I end up picking up the vehicle rather than just lowering the cockpit down. So I like it. I also really like the fact that they utilize the space in the back of the vehicle for transport. That's one of the big things about that HISS, because Philip already mentioned the different HISS that was in the Deke cartoon, but there was also, I was just looking it up to make sure I had the issue number right. Issue number 16 of the G.I. Joe comic has Destro and Hawk battling on what it looks like the flatbed truck portion of the back end of a HISS tank, which does not exist. So there definitely was some bit of, hey, various things of the original HISS have been out there. Let's try to make an update of the HISS tank that takes those into account. And they kind of gave the driver maybe some actual firepower, some forward guns there on the sides.
Yeah. So
that it's not just driving with just one main gun for the tank. It was an update that made a lot of sense and had a lot of play value. So it's really good. Like you said, though, I really would have liked a little bit of a different repaint from the club. I think the obvious thing to have done would have been to have made it in black with a clear canopy and give us a Track Viper in red. Just put the version 1 deco on the HISS 2. That's what I always wanted, and it will never happen.
That's a very, very good point, actually. I would have said, that Python Patrol, there's multiple things they could have done with that, and instead we just get the same thing, just slightly different. It just seemed really, really weird to me. Phil, what about your thoughts of the HISS 2? I know before I've even asked this question that you're not gonna think it's as iconic as the first one, of course, but do you still think it stands up as like a top Cobra vehicle?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. It's not as iconic, but it's up there. And I think if it had been released in black, honestly, if it had been in those original HISS colors, people would have a lot higher opinion of it. For some reason, the grayish blue, muted teal just doesn't seem HISS tank, right? But that upgraded gun on the back, oh my, the 4 barrels that are just gigantic. And then the way that like the gunner seat kind of interacts with the troop storage in the back, with the troop carrying aspect of it, it's actually kind of great. You can see the legs kind of flopping down and then people kind of around him, and like it's got like little
tickling him while he's up in the
Yeah.
gun.
It reminds me of, honestly, the submarine ride at Disneyland, where you just have this guy's legs here, and there's stories of people like pulling down those guys' pants because they think they're just like a dummy.
Oh
It's not an
my
actual person in front of
god!
me.
Oh my goodness me! I'm gonna struggle to find pictures of that, but I'm gonna try.
But yeah, that they added the troop compartment in the back. The door folds down into a loading ramp outside. You can even like pull it out a little bit to put the figures in, and they've got restraints on there. Like
A lot went into the thought, didn't it? The thought process.
a lot went into that. Yeah, and it is a crime that it was only redecoed once and as a convention exclusive, because that's the only version of a domestic HISS tank I don't have yet. Is that one, and like we get the regular HISS a billion times, but they still have the tooling for the HISS2, and we only get that the one. And it was a missed opportunity for sure.
Yeah, because what I've also noticed recently is that the HISS2 is being used almost as a HISS tank in things like Operation Blackout, the comics. So IDW are using the HISS2 way more now than they were before. Like before, you know, it was in a couple of issues in the Marvel run, but like in IDW, they've really been utilizing all of the different vehicles, which is great. But the HISS2 is getting like a lot of love. And there was something else. Oh, World of Tanks. The HISS that they use takes a lot of inspiration as well from both versions. It's not just a straight up HISS tank they're using in World of Tanks. It's almost like a amalgamation of both styles and then made to look a bit more realistic. So it's interesting that the HISS2 is getting kind of a bit more love in the modern era.
I will say, though, I do think the HISS2's basic body design is a little too busy, and I mean, maybe that was a detraction from it. It wasn't just, you know, armored riveted panels that look very strong. It's like a lot of
detail,
rebuilds on it that you don't quite know what the point is, and that kind of detracts it. It has that silhouette that we want in his tank.
A lot of surface area as well, isn't it? Like there's a lot of space on the back of that thing. It's like you got the front, and then the back is just this huge box. And again, like I dig it. I honestly think it's one of those vehicles that has it does have a place in the history of all of these vehicles, and it's just I do think it's really cool. I don't mind the deco, but I agree with you guys. I think if they'd have done that in black, that'd have been sexy as heck. So then, if you've been keeping up, we've had the original version, the HISS2, the HISS3, which is odd to me because it's just a blue redeco, the first one with a named driver. And now we've landed on easily the most ambitious HISS design to date, the HISS4. Now, this one was released in the G.I. Joe vs. Cobra line in 2002. And I remember it being, I think they used it in the comics as well around about the same time. And that feature with the pop-up snake head, I'll always remember was like, man, they've taken all that subtlety from the first couple, and they've just gone full on, this is a snake head, and it jumps up and it's got fangs and everything. What was your take? Your first initial response, Pat, when you first saw that vehicle?
That's silly. Honestly, you asked for my first initial response. I don't hate it as a vehicle. There are a lot of good features to that one as well. It feels more armored for sure than any of the HISS tanks prior to it, which is one of the criticisms I see people mention all the time. But it's a toy. It's meant to be fun. Yes, I understand there's a big glass canopy on the front end of your HISS tank, but I think that criticism was also something that the creators of the HISS4 took into account, because you can't see, well, other than the driver, it's just kind of, or the gunner, I mean, it's just kind of out in the open more than the original HISS tank.
He's on a seat on top of it now. He's not even like half of his body inside.
He just has a lawn chair that they forgot to design a turret for him. He can't duck into anything.
Can the lawn viper go on that?
Right behind him, there's a hatch with other dudes that can hop out into the lawn chair and start shooting things.
Amazing. It's definitely packed with features, isn't it? Like there's loads of cool stuff on it. I must admit, when I first saw it, I was actually like quite impressed with how it operated and did that. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But I have to say that novelty kind of wore off quite soon. And it was really down to the point of like, it's a bit awkward and a bit bulbous and I'm a bit worried I'm going to break it. Do you feel that way, Phil, when you hold it? Do you feel like the head's going to snap or something?
I think part of it is that it doesn't feel latched down properly. Like,
that was it.
It's crooked because it's only got a lock on one side. You have to excuse the missing missile. I didn't have a chance to find it. But, when you... There it goes, shoots up. When you do put this up, it does feel very... very cool, but like you have to pull it out first. It doesn't, go all the way. So
yeah.
I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah,
with this,
that's exactly my experience with it too.
Thought my memory must be. This is one of those memory things because I thought that I could just push the button.
It's the Mandela effect in effect right there. I'm the same though. Until you mentioned that though, I'd have thought the same. Pat, but then when Phil showed it just there, and I was like, yeah, I remember now. You have to slide it out, and then you press the button. It might even say it in the instructions.
I think the problem with this is, they took notes. They gave us an armored canopy, and that just shows us that we don't necessarily know what we want because now we can't see anything. And this thing actually has, it's got a great cockpit in it. I can actually get it to open up. There you go. But you have to pop it up top to be able to lift it open. Which means, how do they get in?
Yeah.
So, they continue a tongue as the seat to keep that whole fang thing going.
Brilliant.
But,
brilliant.
There is so much detail in here that you can't see.
It's a beautiful, beautiful, and also the detailing either side of the vehicle are like almost like the venomous kind of sacs that then fill into the fangs, which I really like that. I think there's so much really cool snake-like elements into it, but I think for me it's just a little bit too bonkers, and I think it's the shape of the head, honestly, as well. I think the shape of the head it's more comical than it is intimidating. Would you say?
Possibly. I think it's more the bulbous body for me because it kind of looks like a fat hiss. But then also, the true compartment in the back, I appreciate that, but it fits two people and not very well.
Do they have to do the thing where you sit on top of a toilet together?
That's the driver sitting in the one spot, and it's like you don't have room for the knees of the other guy.
Yeah, that is going to be some footsieville going on all the way to Springfield.
I like that it retained the general shape of the treads, the tracks. You can really see them on this one, whereas when you're looking at the HISS2, it's covered by those greebles that Philip was mentioning earlier that look a little odd. That has that very iconic HISS look to the side of it. I could identify that as a HISS tank by that, even if I wasn't told that it was a HISS tank. Yeah. And honestly, the Cobra motif, that was something that we saw a lot of in the vehicles that were designed specifically for the Sunbow cartoon. So while it's almost a little silly, I would think that people who are especially fans of Sunbow really should gravitate to the HISS4, I would think.
Yeah. And which is, well, you say that. I'm a massive Sunbow fan, but yeah, I know what you're saying totally. I think when I look at that hiss, I don't get intimidation from it, and I think there's a lot of aspects as to why that's the case. Like you say, the big fat body, the kind of shape of the head, the feature, which is cool. But I think I saw it in the comics first and actually thought it looked really dope, and then when I saw it in the vehicle, I was like, oh, that's cool. But like I said, the novelty sort of wore off a little bit, but it's definitely got some, I would say it's got Deke vibes. The Deke series, it's got massive Deke vibes. What would you say that, Pat?
I'd probably choose different words, but sure.
No, you wouldn't.
And I think a part of it also is that the color works against it. This is an ugly red, honestly. I don't know who would want that. And then it's covered with a darker, uglier red with really muted blues. It's too drab and yet too gaudy at the same time.
I definitely agree with the deco there, and I like that. Generally, I like maroon and that kind of color. But you're right, it's almost like a dirty version of it, isn't it? And it's not quite, But I am gonna say though, they went full on even with snake skin deco. They tried to do it there as well, so they have really pushed the envelope on snake aspects there, and I've got to give them props for that. New driver as well, the Neo Viper version 3. Not your favourite, not my favourite, not anyone's favourite.
The T-crotch, again, people always went up in arms about the lack of O-ring, but for me, it's more about the hand positioning that doesn't work.
I just thought that it was a little bit simple. You know, they just took a figure that was same exact build of a figure and just applied a different color to it. But as we said, you're not going to be able to see that driver from outside the vehicle, so it doesn't matter.
You're not even going to be. He can't even get in the cockpit anyway. So, well, I'll tell you one thing though. There he is. I'll tell you one thing though. It was redecoed, wasn't it, in for the Valor vs Venom line in 2005. So
a little bit, right?
Sorry.
It had a different cannon up top, I believe, didn't it?
Yeah, slight retool.
You're a slight retool, but do you prefer the black and blue on it, guys, than the maroon?
I definitely prefer that.
Oh, there you go.
It's a massive gun.
that is one of the stations during Gladiators during the assault, isn't it? Is it assault, the one where they run to each different section and fire off a bazooka and stuff?
That's the American Gladiators. Yeah, it's a.
That's one of them, isn't it?
It feels like it. That, or you can get cell phone reception on Cobra Island with it.
I mean, the gunner's still almost as exposed as before.
He's got a bit more protection. There's a bit more protection there, but only because the gun's bigger. That's it, isn't it? It's like, yeah, you're protected because the gun's massive, effectively. Yeah.
He's still wide open from the sides. His legs are going to dangle out in front. Yeah. But, yeah, this, I think, shows you the difference color can make.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, for sure. I joke, but I really do have a love for this era, a big love, because G.I. Joe was definitely trying to do a lot of new things.
It was trying to reinvent itself, wasn't it, at the time?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of good stuff to go with this as well. I think that would be a fun toy for kids.
I also
and goes a long way of being important.
I also feel like at the time, around that time, it didn't know exactly what it was at that point, because there were new people involved in in charge of the brand and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like they were really throwing stuff out there, experimenting, trying different stuff, trying new things, and you almost see like a development through that time period, don't you, of things developing and changing and going a different direction, and then all of a sudden you've got something completely different that comes out the other side of it.
Yeah, that's true. I think that there were a lot of good ideas that haven't been revisited from that era, and it's a shame. Even in the 25th and Pursuit of Cobra, whenever they were doing that, there are things like the figure that Philip just held up. I actually thought that was a really cool design. What was that, the Pit Viper?
Pit Viper, yeah.
Repainted for the HISS tank. That
version 2.
It's a very simple design, but it was a good one. I liked that. I would like to see an updated figure of that character. And the fact that they chose to put that with HISS tank, I thought, I really did think that helped that vehicle quite a lot to come with a better figure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's the HISS4 then, and obviously the 2 versions that we got of that. Before we look deeper into the modern era of HISSes, there is at least one more mainline HISS that we haven't touched on yet. Time to get gross. Don't touch that, it'll go septic. In 1991, polluting the Earth was all the rage. There were a number of animated shows that highlighted the world's environmental problems, like the Smoggies and Captain Planet, that led the team at Hasbro to think about incorporating such an idea into the current A Real American Hero toy line. The Eco Warriors were born. For the Joes, Flint was chosen as the lead for the team and introduced new characters, Ozone and Clean Sweep, with Barbecue and Deep Six joining the following year. For Cobra, though, a brand new big bad was developed called Cesspool. This chief environmental officer needed a chariot to ride into battle, so of course, the team looked at the HISS tank as a potential candidate. With a new bright orange and lime green deco and some newly modified parts, the Septic Tank was born. The vehicle could shoot water, which in turn would affect the figure's colour change capabilities, making for a fun action feature. It featured in some awesome commercials as well, which Philip will discuss shortly. In 2014, the Septic Tank got a Modern Convention exclusive update using yet another new build for the HISS, which debuted in 2005 as an online and Toys R Us exclusive with another new driver, the Night Creeper version 10. It seemed like anybody could drive a HISS tank now. A smaller scale version was used in the Sigma 6 mission scale, as well as a pre-production piece existing with a sealed rear hatch and almost tiger-striped deco. The new model followed the HISS-2 design very closely and would be seen again down the road, but we will get back to that after we've discussed the septic tank. Okay then, Philip, you have a version of the septic tank unlike any other, don't you?
Well, I have this septic tank, which is probably a lot like some other people's septic tank.
It's not like my septic tank. My septic tank's covered in underground, but that's fine.
Well, that's because we have sewers here. But I also have this septic tank.
Now, this he just looks like he just pulled out of the sewer. Look at that beauty.
Oh, it is gross, and I love it.
Please watch the articulated points video where Phil discusses this in detail, but he's going to discuss it in slightly less detail now, aren't you, mate?
Yeah, so this is the HISS tank that was used in the commercial. But it's not the HISS tank that was used for the kid demonstrating the toy. This was a HISS tank that attacked the live-action Duke in the live-action segments that were running through those 1991 shows.
Amazing. So, differences then. Don't you have, isn't there some sort of like, did they have it on a stick or something and there's like a big hole in the back?
There is a hole in the back here, yes, but rather than having a squirt gun with a plunger in the back, this is actual syringe where...
wow.
I keep trying to pull this out and I'm breaking the damn thing, but...
You're going to snap
you can actually pull out the metal and squirt that, and it'll make a rather powerful flow coming out the front.
That's amazing.
You can see the mount is different on here, where we actually have the elevated mount that you can see on some of the prototypes, like on the back of the box here.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
As well as an earlier version of the canopy. Again, you can see on the box, but it's much more streamlined on the production toy.
Yeah, that's so cool. So they used this, didn't they, to kind of bash through the walls in one of the scenes? And didn't you say like they affixed a stick to it in order to kind of push it through? Was that right?
That's what we're assuming, but we don't have the official word on how they filmed that. It's just kind of what we think.
I see.
I'm pretty sure.
Isn't there a hole in the bottom in the back?
Oh yeah, right here. Yeah.
That's what I think. That's what I was like referring to earlier. That's amazing. That must have been somewhere where they kind of affixed something to get that. Yeah, that's amazing. That's so good. I love the fact that it's still covered in whatever it is, plasma tox.
Yeah, and it keeps coming off. So I have in the box it came in. It's still filled with it. I forget what this was. It was told. I have to look it up again, but baking. It looks like cotton and baking soda, maybe. But yeah. Just because it was in an Arctic scene where this happened. It was Arctic base, so it's covered in snow. So don't worry about touching this part. That's okay.
I would have. I tell you what, looking at some of those commercials as well, I loved them. I would have loved some of those life-size kind of mock-up vehicles they threw together, because was it like the Badger or that one that caught on fire accidentally and they nearly burned alive inside it.
Is it the battle wagon?
Yes, the battle wagon. That's the one I want, the most dangerous one. I want the flames as well behind me as I'm driving it.
And the scorched paneling.
And I love that one where he was talking about the glider, and the guy that was on the big glider, didn't he like catch fire as well? Because like a firework went off, or like a bang went off kind of thing, and lit him up. Jeez, man, the insurance premiums on those must have been high. Tell you now. But love that, Phil. That's such a cool piece to have. Is it like? I mean, is that one of your like prized possessions? Is that one that you really love?
I mean, I'd be crazy not to, right? I've actually since gone back and started collecting as much as I can on the septic tank, because I want to make a whole septic tank shrine.
Oh, that's amazing.
Which is why I have like a domestic box, a European box,
toxic,
a UK box, and
I love
this
that,
one still has an unassembled septic tank inside it.
That's what I'm talking about.
I've got.
That's the best one, by the way. That's the best one you have.
Of course it is. I want to get the Chinese box, which is just the British box with
the sticker on
over it.
Yeah, yeah.
I still got. I missed my chance to pick one up of those a year ago, so I got to wait for another one to come around. But I've gotten a copy of the animation model. I've got these Polaroids of like pre-production versions of the HISS tanks that I think were used in the making of the boxes.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Like the art in there and the catalog. And I even, I've got the old Impel card too, a second one of those, because I already have a complete set. But it's just, how much septic tank stuff can I now get just to justify this purchase of this one and make it the centerpiece of a septic tank collection?
I tell you what, it's going to be a bright collection, isn't it?
You won't be able to miss it.
I love the septic tank for what it is. I love its unashamed, ridiculous deco. I love its position within like the environmental aspect that was going on at the time, and how like that was the rage, at the time. Like it was Captain Planet and the Smoggies and all those kind of like shows. Anyway, Pat, you've been quiet during this whole time. Is the septic tank up there for you? Do you really like this, or is this do you hate it as much as life?
No, I actually love it, which is maybe a little weird for me. I don't like toys whenever they start off looking dirty. That's not something that I'm a fan of. So like the dirty treads on that HISS3, no thanks. I also don't like gross out toys like Mad Balls. I was never into those. Like, people just assume that little boys like bugs and slime. And so I think that I resisted that a little bit more than usual.
Yeah.
But the Eco Warriors, all of that makes sense to me. Like having the Joes battle the grossness is a totally different idea. So having something like the Toxo Lab in the toy line, I was all about it, because that was whenever I was really heavy into wanting to collect, not play with, but really collect G.I. Joe. And so coming back out with a HISS tank only modified was great.
Yeah, agreed. And also, did you say Jada Toys Toxo Lab? Because that would be amazing. Right then, let's look at some of the better foreign versions of the HISS. When a vehicle hits the right design aesthetic and begins to transcend its original purpose of basically just being a cool vehicle, then everybody wants a piece of the pie. It didn't take long for Palitoy to jump on this vehicle, only to rebrand it as the Red Shadows Hyena and paint it red in 1984. It even got a new driver, Red Jackal. Anton Novikov, once with Action Force, was critically injured in a crash and presumed dead. The Red Shadows rebuilt him as a cyborg and used him to drive their new Hyena vehicle. Destro was used for the repaint, and I've wanted Hasbro to do an homage in the modern era ever since. I mean, it's a white collar and a red undershirt, and you're there, you're done. Overstock of the same Hyena was also sold in 1985 with Cobra stickers applied to the exterior box, which followed the change in the comics from Red Shadows to Cobra at the time. A version 2 in black was also released with a new Cobra sticker sheet and a new Hyena driver, which was just the HISS driver. What's funny about this is that some of the early releases had overstock red Hyenas inside, despite the black version on the box. Classic Palitoy move. Japan got a Takara version in 1986 with a HISS driver, but Brazil wanted one too, and under the Estrella they released the Commandos Emissão Super Kanhao Laser, only with no driver. A South Korean version of the HISS 2 was also released that featured stickers over the original US box. Not quite as many foreign releases as the VAMP saw, but we did get something cool in Action Force there, didn't we, lads? We've got to talk about it because I'm on the show, so... I know, look, Phil, I know you're a big fan of the Hyena because we had discussions about this, and in actual fact you were questioning me about it not too long ago. But how much fun is that sticker sheet on the frickin' Red Shadows version? Like, seriously.
I got mine right here. It's
Good
all
man.
stripy, and I pointed this out on our own channel, but
don't watch it.
That they filled.
Watch it. Definitely watch it.
I love how they filled out the canopy.
Look at that.
An actual seat in there.
Look at that. You see, this is where I think this is where I think Palitoy excelled. They may have done things like on the cheap in some aspects, but in others they went like all over the shop. And I think with stickers, because it is like an easier thing to do than say deco in a factory and so on and so forth, you know, they really went to town on the stickers, and I love all the details. If you get close-ups on some of those stickers, which I'll do on the side here, you'll see some beautiful, beautiful like additions of like, you know, targeting systems and all sorts inside that cockpit. But then, yeah, all the other stuff going on around. It's just gorgeous. And look, Pat's even got his look. Look at this.
I will say,
somebody added some Cobra logos to it. Mine's a little worn off. Not quite as nice as Philip's there, but I definitely was excited to have gotten mine.
I will say some of these stickers don't look quite so thought out. Like these monitor screens behind the driver's head probably aren't very useful. But
well, you see, that's where all of the canon comes in, where you go, he could see those behind him in his heads-up display, and it was pointless to have it behind him. But yeah, that's amazing, Pat, as well. Like right in the gunner spot as well. You know, you just don't have. I know there's just so much beautiful detail in it for me, and I love that about what Palitoy did, especially with the sticker sheets and stuff. Yeah, Pat's camera's gone like all sad and it's crying. Look, there you go. Yeah, absolutely beautiful. What's really ironic is the only Brit on the show is not the one holding the hyena. We'll have to make
you with the other two hyenas.
Thank you very much. There you go. Look at that. Isn't that gorgeous?
You were showing off the Brazilian one as well, weren't you?
Yeah, I have that as also.
Is that the? Oh, nice.
I should point out there were more South American countries that got a regular HISS, but they're very much like the domestic. They aren't. Only the UK did something as drastic as a redeco. Yeah. But there are some variances in the sticker quality, and the canopy color can go from like clear almost to black.
Yeah, yeah.
So
and also different stamps as well, right? And they have like different kind of country stamps and stuff like that.
Well, I think Australia is the only one that actually has an actual stamp on it. I think the other ones are just a standard Hasbro.
Okay. But, that's awesome. That's really cool.
I think this is, honestly, we go back to black. This is my favorite of the hyenas, just because I love the reinterpretation of the Cobra design. Like there's this uniform yellow, white, red on all the Cobra vehicles that Palitoy put out. Yeah. And a red, white, and blue on all the G.I. Joe vehicles. And I love that unifying theme. But also, you know, another seat in the canopy. Like, it's not as extensive as the Red Shadows hyena, but it's still enough in there, isn't it, to really make it pop? And look at that. It's just that for me, like I love that. I love seeing that kind of detail inside the canopy.
And they didn't just color swap. That's not the same seat. That's a different decal altogether than the one that's in the hyena.
Absolutely.
That's really impressive.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I love the fact that even the black version we had with those stickers makes it very, very different looking, like visibly different as you look at two of them next to each other. Look at that! Look at that! Brilliant, isn't it? I just find that so. I love that about the guys that worked on it. Just the attention to detail was fantastic.
And I will say, this is not just a U.S. HISS tank with new stickers. This is actually a hyena where the red canopy has been swapped out for black, because on the hyenas, the guns and the treads are actually a dark gray.
Yeah.
And that's still present on this version. You compare those, there's a definite color difference.
It's amazing. I love that. I love those little. It makes it worth it, doesn't it? As well, let's face it. It makes it worth it to have multiple versions of these things.
Actually, track this down, and you can know when you actually have an authentic one versus one that's just been restickered with a third party sticker.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, there you go. That's probably one of the greatest ever foreign releases of a vehicle ever, in my opinion. Took what the HISS was and made it probably about 60 times better. Would you say, guys? Again, I'm joking. I'm just being biased and silly. Yeah. Biased and silly. I love that. I think the detail that you get with the interior canopy, I've always loved that. When that next level is taken, that always makes things 1,000 times better for me. But yeah, love that. Right then, just the modern era left to cover. So take it away, me. The fifth design iteration came in the Pursuit of Cobra line in 2010. The design was inspired and included working treads and a spring-loaded feature that would see the entire tank body rise up in an homage to the HISS-4. New weapon systems were introduced that featured a button which controlled the direction of both the launcher and machine gun. The HISS driver was back and updated to fit the Pursuit of Cobra aesthetic. Interestingly, earlier releases had a maroon body, grey tracks and weapons, and a red missile, with later releases recoloured all in black. Additionally, the spring-loaded catch for the elevated attack position was retooled to be more secure. This later release also included updated instructions. The following year, a Crimson version was released for the 30th anniversary line and came with a brand new driver, the Cobra Crimson Horseman. In 2012, a mini HISS Scout was devised for Pursuit of Cobra that came with the Cobra HISS driver version 4. It basically looked like when you draw a cartoon head with feet coming off the bottom. Very cute, but looked unfinished in my opinion. The Joes also got their own version in the Tread Ripper, which does of course take inspiration from a real vehicle, which in turn took inspiration from the original HISS with that tread configuration. The Scout was designed to dock with the HISS version 5 as well, which was a very cool feature indeed. Unfortunately, the version 5 design would go through some cost-cutting avenues for its next release, which meant no more working treads and a slightly different elevation feature. The SDCC exclusive Transformers crossover saw this newer version get a Shockwave Deco makeover, as well as a ton of figures and accessories. A purple beefed up Destro version 28 and a Constructicon Deco Bat version 22 were included in this one. In my opinion, the figures and accessories outshone the vehicle, but only really due to all the limitations on the new design. In the same year, we got another release of the same vehicle in the Retaliation line with the controversial 5-point of articulation Cobra Commander driver and a blue deco. That was that for the new modern era design, and shortly after we reverted back to the original version 1, and most recently we have seen releases for Jada Toys in the mini vehicle department and in the Retro series in both black and blue, with the HISS driver getting a new build and a repaint for Rip It in the latest release. The circle of life is complete. Right then, version 5. I thought this was brilliant and inspired and amazing when Pursuit of Cobra hit. I thought it was freaking amazing, an amazing upgrade, loved it. When they did the cost-cutting measures for the other releases, I was like, I literally was, I feel like it's not, it feels like a bootleg to me. And it's a shame because that Shockwave deco is really cool and the big Shockwave gun's cool. And even that Cobra Commander design's amazing that comes with the Retaliation version, but being 5 there's so many things about it that drive me mad, and it's all cost-cutting. What were your thoughts when you first saw that first ever Pursuit of Cobra HISS?
I loved it. At the Joe convention, I think it was Rich Woodhouse showed off his work on that. I think that he's the one that was really heading up the design work on it. And as I recall, I think that the scratch-built one that he had done used 2 sharks. Like he had taken the shark and like sawed the back end off somehow and had one of them upside down. And it was amazing to me that it looked like a totally brand new vehicle, but something that I felt that I absolutely had to have. And I think that he mentioned at that point that it would elevate, but I don't remember if he showed us it doing that. I think, though, that as updates to the HISS tank go, it's possibly the best one since the original one. I really just love it. I remember looking at it and thinking, wow, if they did a live action movie now, for all the complaints of the tank canopy being glass and you could shoot through it and it looks old or whatever, that it would be a nice way of introducing the HISS tank to the world. I was very happy with that design. I think that the original, for me, will always be the most iconic HISS tank, but this one's really nice. It has those classic treads. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, the treads, man. Just that alone is cool. Phil, what were your thoughts when you first saw it?
At first thought, controversially, I was infuriated.
Really?
Because they called it the HISS tank version 5. But then, what was the direct-to-consumer HISS tank? That was its own unique design, too. That should have been the version 5. This should have been HISS tank version 6. But, that's the OCD in me again. But, I am a little saddened that it doesn't have the same silhouette as a HISS tank. Even the HISS-4, you kind of have that same sort of base shape there. But the HISS-5 is a completely different design. At least they kept the tread shape. But I do like the features. I'm not quite sure why it elevates. They never quite gave a reason for that. But
that's a good point, isn't it? That is just literally just showing off, isn't it? At that point, just goes literally up higher.
The low rider.
I think it's so they can like not run over all their own troops. It's like they're all in front of him. They just go, whoop, there we go.
Yeah, with the crisscrossing bars and the hoses and stuff, you trip them up anyway.
Yeah, decapitate them still, but you're not going to crush them. That's the main thing.
Yeah, the new cockpit setup was kind of cool. And then the gunner station where the guy was upside down when you put him in, and then he goes right side up. Too bad he won't see daylight at all, but at least he's protected this time.
Yeah.
And that it can dock with the HISS Scout, which I think it was a neat feature, but it was only ever actually spoken of in like the conventions. Like it wasn't called out in the instructions at all, was it?
Yeah, you don't see it anywhere. I wasn't aware until I saw it on Yojo, honestly, and I saw it being like shown off on Yojo.
I only knew it did that because I read about it being reported on at the convention, and I had to figure that out when it finally came out. Was it a year late?
It doesn't really work that well, though, whenever it docks, does it? It seems like it would be something that maybe they would do to bring it into battle, or I don't know where the utility is of it actually docking.
And also the problem is it throws off the balance. Like, you have to be very positioned, otherwise it'll just...
Yeah, I figured it would be back heavy when you stuck it on there. Did you like my description of it being a head with feet?
You know, I can kind of see that. But it's a Scout, I guess. It's going to be smaller. But, I mean, the original HISS tank was a Scout, too.
Yeah, but, like, I think when I saw, like, obviously the Tread Ripper that's in the movie at least has a something over the top of it kind of thing. And I like the fact that the Tread Ripper took inspiration from the original HISS, and then the Tread Ripper in the film is the good guy vehicle against those HISS tanks. And then we get HISS Scout, which uses the Tread Ripper body in the toys. I just like that kind of odd, weird.
Curls
yeah, I think that's really cute and really fun. Yeah, it's kind of like it's all using each other, to come to the same place. But yeah. Well, there you go. That's the HISS. I've got to say, I really loved it. I thought it was amazing. I think I remember when it came out in red. That kind of darker crimson. I was really at that point. I was like, yeah, this is great. I'll have more of these, please. Loads more of these. And then the Transformers one came out, and I wasn't aware of the changes until I took it out and was putting it together. And I'm like, hang on, the treads are one piece. What's going on here? And then when the elevation, like the first one, it's like straight up, and then this one it just goes like that, doesn't it? It just leans forward in a sense. So yeah, I was very disappointed that it had gone through those changes, honestly. But I suppose with the Shockwave one, you can get away with it just looking cool and looking like Shockwave with the big gun on the top of it. But the Retaliation one, the fact they did the same release for Retaliation, I was like, man, they have really cut the corners there. And that's not what Retaliation was really about. Like, there's some cracking figures in that lineup. So it was funny, wasn't it, that we got all those, like, we got the 5-point of articulation drivers and we got those aspects removed. I mean, I would have loved to have seen that Cobra Commander, like, fully articulated.
Yeah, as a great design with a little Gatling gun on the wrist, and the helmet's probably the best of the Retaliation Cobra Commander helmets. Yeah, it was definitely done to a budget, I will say. And I didn't hate it, though, because at least it had the same features that the original HISS tank had. Rotating turret, opening canopy. That's all I really want to see at bare minimum for my HISS tank. So
yeah,
more bells and whistles is nice, but as long as it's just that, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
But again, not in black.
Just weird blues all the time. Anyway, right, that's the end of the HISS tank feature.